Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So today we're going to be looking at another PS1 classic, Croc Legend of the Gobbos, released in 1997, developed by Argonaut Games. This is another childhood favourite of mine. So those of you who have been following my channel for some time, will know that 90s PS1 platformers are a huge passion of mine. They practically sum up my childhood. Many of my favourite childhood memories involve playing these types of games, and they definitely mean a lot to me. When it comes to 90s PS1 platformers of this kind, many of them of course went on to become huge franchises that were massively successful and spanned multiple generations of gaming. Franchises such as Spyro, Rayman, Crash Bandicoot and several others were gaming phenomenons that are still going strong today. Croc on the other hand, for whatever reason, never saw the same level of success. From what I remember, the game never received the same amount of hype or marketing as its competitors, despite being just as good, if not better than some of them in my opinion. The game only received one sequel a couple years later and basically went into obscurity for many years after that. There were a few mobile games and stuff like that, but they were practically unheard of. As far as I'm concerned, Croc Legend of the Gobbos is a massively underrated platformer that did a lot of things right. So the game is a third-person action-adventure platformer where you play as Croc, an adorable young crocodile who was raised by a tribe of fluffy creatures known as Gobbos. I mentioned before how the game was developed by Argonaut Games, the same team who later went on to develop the excellent Harry Potter games on the PS1, which you guys might remember. I reviewed last year. When starting the game, you are treated to what I can only describe as the most adorable, yet tragic and utterly heartbreaking intro in gaming history. I almost don't know how to describe it, so just watch. Yeah, I know, if that isn't enough to motivate you to see the game through to the end, I don't know what will. I just had to rescue those poor innocent Gobbos, and nothing, I repeat nothing, was going to stand in my way. But I digress. So the Gobbos' homeland is invaded by a gang of demonic monsters led by the evil Baron, Baron Dante, who serves as the main villain of the game. Before being captured, the king of the Gobbos sends Croc away so he can be safe, and can return to rescue the Gobbos. The game consists of Croc traversing the levels that span across several different islands, defeating the demons and rescuing the Gobbos, en route to Dante himself. It's a relatively simple plot that doesn't take itself too seriously and knows what it is, and its premise is pretty standard for a platformer. As I mentioned before, the game takes place across multiple islands. You have 4 main islands as well as a bonus island, we'll talk about that later. Each island will consist of a whole bunch of levels, each with their own visual style and aesthetic. The vast majority of the game consists of platforming, defeating enemies, and hunting for collectibles. The main objective of each level is to reach the end and activate a gong which unlocks the next level. The collectibles in the levels are optional for the most part, but will be needed to unlock all the game's content and complete the game 100%. The main collectible is the Gobbos. Each level will have 6 Gobbos to find. Some of them are locked up in cages and you will need to find and obtain a key to unlock them. Others will be hidden in boxes, or will require a specific challenge or minigame to unlock, such as a memory game which pops up from time to time. or even some more reflex-based games. There are several different kinds of these, some more challenging than others. Some of the later levels in the game require you to complete a race to reach the key first to save the Gobbos. There are many different types of challenges like these, and all of them are fun. The Gobbos are usually pretty easy to find, but if you do happen to miss any, then you can always replay the level to find them. Levels are relatively short and don't overstay their welcome, so replaying them to find collectibles isn't too much of a bother. But like I said before, most of them are easy to find anyway, so rarely will you have to replay levels. Another collectible found throughout the game is crystals. You find crystals scattered throughout the levels. Most of them are lying around, and some of them are found in boxes that can be stomped on to open them. The crystals serve a similar function to the rings in the Sonic the Hedgehog games. You collect them while traversing the levels and they will give you an extra hit point. Like Sonic, Croc has no health bar and instead relies on these crystals for defense. When Croc takes damage, he will lose crystals, and you will have a short time to reacquire them before they disappear. Having no crystals means one hit will finish you. You can also find extra lives scattered throughout the game. These are few and far between however, and in later levels there are hardly any of them. Early on they are a bit more plentiful. Another collectible you find is the coloured gems. There are 5 of these in each level, and these can be used to unlock a coloured gem door at the end of each level. Usually one or more of the Gobbos in the level will be found beyond one of these coloured doors, so the coloured gems are needed to find them all. Again, just like the Gobbos, these are usually easy to find, but if you do miss any, you can always replay the levels to find them. Some of them are actually disguised as regular crystals, so be sure to find as many of them as you can just in case. I mentioned before that the game has combat. The combat of the game is pretty simple. You can strike enemies by pressing the square button, and most enemies are defeated in one hit. One annoying feature in the game is that regular enemies will actually respawn only seconds after being defeated. Some enemies try to hit you with melee attacks, others will use ranged attacks. The combat isn't really the game's strongest point, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily bad. It's standard for a 90s platformer. In some of the later levels, the enemies are sometimes invincible and can't be damaged, meaning you have to avoid them to survive the levels, and this can be very frustrating. Aside from combat and hunting for collectibles, the main feature of the game is platforming. This is one of them games where the majority of the levels consist of either bottomless pits or deadly traps such as spike traps, lava or freezing cold water. These must be avoided. The platforming and jumping mechanics are fine for the most part, and when compared to other 90s platformers, I'd say it's on par with most of them. There are moving platforms, platforms that break, platforms that shrink, and some trippy and confusing ones later in the game. The jumping is practically perfect when jumping forward, and you will get used to it pretty quickly. However, it can be a bit of a problem when having to quickly turn or jump diagonally, since the game isn't really designed for that and the controls in that regard are quite stiff, and the camera isn't the best to be honest. But only a small number of sections in the game require this, and once again you will get used to it. This was pretty standard for games of the time, and the technical limitations of the time do need to be considered. All in all, the game's combat is pretty standard, and the platforming is almost perfect. I have no serious issues with them. At certain points in the game, you will come across underwater sections. These are few and far between, but there are several of them. The swimming and underwater gameplay is, as you might expect, a lot slower and more sluggish than the regular gameplay, but I don't really have a problem with it. The underwater sections usually involve Croc having to swim through to find some collectibles, and I don't mind them. Although the underwater combat is a bit frustrating, but that is to be expected given the technical limitations of the time. It's not the best underwater gameplay I've ever experienced, but it's certainly not the worst. And it is something that adds a bit of variety to the game, which is good. In between some of the regular levels, you also have bonus levels. Instead of collecting Gobbos and coloured gems, these bonus levels have you searching for a puzzle piece to end the level. There are 8 of these puzzle pieces in the game, and collecting them all will unlock the bonus island. In addition to these levels, there are also boss levels. There are 2 boss levels on each main island. You will encounter a boss at the end of these levels. These levels begin with a short cutscene introducing them. You also get a short cutscene after winning them. The boss battles are all pretty easy once you figure out their patterns and weaknesses. Most of them can be defeated in 3 hits and, like usual with PS1 platformer boss battles, they can usually be figured out by simply circling them and waiting for them to attack, before indicating that they can be attacked. Despite their simplicity, the bosses are all unique from one another and feel very different. One of the early bosses, Flibby, I remember confused me as a kid, because I thought all you had to do was knock him over. It took me a while to figure out that you had to also stomp him afterwards. One of the bosses, Neptuna, actually takes place underwater. So yeah, the boss battles are fine. I mentioned before how there's a 5th bonus island that can be unlocked by collecting all the puzzle pieces in the bonus levels. This consists of 4 levels in the style of the other islands, as well as a secret final boss battle which gains you 100% completion. This is a nice little bonus feature and I appreciate it. It also sets up the sequel nicely. The graphics and presentation are excellent for the time, and the character models of both Croc and the Gobbos themselves look incredibly cute, and the villains look creepy and intimidating. The game also has a tremendous soundtrack. The game's main theme is one of the most catchy and memorable tunes of all time, and even the regular levels have music that perfectly suits the atmosphere and tone of each. The soundtrack was composed by a man named Justin Shavona, however you pronounce his name, who interestingly also provided the voice for Croc. Fantastic soundtrack and one of my personal favourites. The game also has a very unique and interesting visual design. The levels all look great, each island has its own aesthetic too. You have a grassy island, a snowy ice island, a desert island, and even a medieval castle style island. The bonus island is kind of a mixture of all the other 4. Great looking game. So that pretty much sums up my thoughts on Croc Legend of the Gobbos. It's a massively underrated, legendary 90s PS1 platformer, in my personal opinion, and it holds a special place in my heart. Thanks for watching guys, let me know what you guys think. I give the game a solid 9 out of 10, I don't really have any major criticisms for it. It's on par with any platformer of the time as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, it's a great game. Thanks for watching guys, let me know what you guys think, stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. Once again I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.